In response to the Module 3 video application assignment about the Citarum River, I wanted to clarify some of the theoretical perspectives we have studied so far in this class. Most students chose to craft their analysis from two of the following theoretical perspectives that I have previously presented in our course: political ecology, cultural materialism, ethnoecology, and spiritual ecology. Next, I'm going to take these one by one and explain a little bit more about them. First is political ecology, which recognizes that reality is experienced differently by people living at the same moment in the same place. To hit this home, consider an example. Consider designing a course in U.S. history. You might want to include tales of trial and triumph, history of the revolution of our country, of our wars, expansion of territory, suffrage, which is different people gaining the right to vote, and the history of civil rights. Now, depending on who you are and your interests, you could come up with a very different U.S. history class. You might focus on women's history, or Black history, or the history of Native peoples of North America from 1776 to the present. And depending on these perspectives, you would develop a very different reel of highlights representing U.S. history. You might interpret the same events in a very different light. So when we're considering political ecology, we want to apply a critical lens to understand why differences in perspective exist. What powerful forces shape human ecology, both in terms of access to resources and our place within the social structure of society? What powerful forces shape our opportunities as individuals, our access and control over resources, our place within the social hierarchy, and what powerful forces incentivize our behavior? So this could be politics or the legal system or economics. Here are some examples from student responses to the assignment that accurately reflect a political ecology lens. The first example says it is easier for textile factories to dump waste and leftover production materials into the river and not be held accountable for the quality of it, meaning the water. This example draws a clear connection between economic incentives and lack of legal accountability and the textile factory's decision whether or not to dump waste into the river. The second example says, the Indonesian government and military already have fairly strong control over some aspects of what happens around the Citarum River, with military operations to clean the river, as well as river pollution by local textile factories being made illegal. This is also enforced by the police. This example draws clear connections between the behavior of textile factories and the legal system and the enforcement of regulations by police and the military getting involved to clean up the river. Next, consider cultural ecology, which recognizes that cultural practices and social institutions stem from environmental conditions. And it's important to remember that when we're talking about the human environment, this includes both the biological habitat and the social environment within which humans exist. So think about what culturally sanctioned behavioral adaptations exist to help an individual know how to maneuver successfully through the world and through their society. Consider this example. Historically, pathogens infected lowland waterways in Europe, and in pre-modern times, without modern sanitation practices, strong cultural traditions emerged in response to these pathogen-infected waterways. And these cultural traditions convert the contaminated water into safer sources of hydration. Some examples are the production of beer and mead, which the alcohol content kills bacteria and viruses in the water. And the same is true for boiling water prior to steeping tea. Places with a tradition of brewing and drinking tea happen to overlap with the pathogens that were endemic in their waterways. So a cultural ecologist would argue that those two situations are clearly linked. Now apply this cultural ecology perspective to our river example. The first student response says that rituals have replaced pesticide. It would be useful in estimating if more ritualistic practices will replace other technologies. This example highlights that traditional cultural rituals are used to combat agricultural pests, clearly linking the ecology of pests with the practice of developing these rituals. The next example says we can use the standard of living that was present before the river was highly toxic and use it as a standard to return to. This example recognizes that there was a certain quality of life, a certain standard of living that people recognized and culturally attached to before the river became highly toxic. And so this might inspire cultural practices to return to that pre-toxic lifestyle. And finally, the example at the bottom says that all of their waste is repurposed without being disposed into streams that flow into the Citarum River. It's the Nagas' way to ensure that downstream communities get clean drinking water. A lot can be learned from this, and it can also be a platform to build additional improvements. This example highlights that it is the people's way, it is the way of this culture to protect the water so that people downstream can enjoy clean water too. And it goes on to highlight the informative nature of this theoretical lens. So if we know about their cultural practice of repurposing their waste in order to prevent polluting the river, protecting communities downstream, then we can leverage that when developing river cleanup efforts. The next theoretical lens is cultural materialism, which recognizes that all humans have the same basic need for food, water, safe places to sleep, mates to reproduce with. And so we expect that every society has behavioral adaptations to meet these universal human needs. Consider this example: igloos and adobe structures. These are very different building traditions, but both reflect the same human need for a safe dwelling. Both types of structures make use of locally available building materials, snow, and I don't know if you've heard of adobe dwellings before, but these are made of mud and dry plant material that gets packaged into bricks and laid out in the sun, and they become very hard. So it's a type of brick made in the desert communities of the American Southwest. But what both of these structures have in common is that they work really good to regulate the indoor temperature to a tolerable level despite extreme temperatures in the outside. Of course, it's cold temperature in the case of igloos and very hot temperature in the case of adobes. So let's apply cultural materialism to our river example. The first student quote is, "A lot of farmland relies on this river, and because it is so polluted, it is affecting their," meaning the farmers, "level of output and the health level of their crops." So it's linking the environmental dilemma to the human need to feed one's self and one's family. The second student says the river is crucial for life in the region as it provides clean water for agriculture as well as safe drinking water for people. Yet 70% of the waste comes from households. The NGO offered an exchange program where people could get things like groceries by bringing waste to the different program sites. What I like about this quote is that the student clearly links the reliance of people on the river water for both crops and safe drinking water, and then leverages that, knowing that that's going on, then inspires this solution to the dilemma where the NGO was offering people groceries in order to turn in things that might otherwise end up as pollution in the river. So that NGO was clearly leveraging people's universal need to get rid of their waste and to eat groceries in order to design a successful anti-pollution campaign. Now let's think about ethnoecology, which recognizes that perceptions about natural phenomena, how the universe works, and humanity's place in it varies from culture to culture. When we're thinking about ethnoecology, some things to remember are evaluating how people in the society view humanity's relationship with nature, whether or not it is a cultural practice to attribute souls to non-human animals or to blame natural phenomena like droughts or rainfall on deities or the favor of those deities. If you read the article about Taipei, Peru and the drought, there you got a rich ethnoecology example where traditionally in Taipei, many people blame recent droughts on humanity's failure to make proper tribute to the mountain god. But if you were an American in the same situation, if you were a tourist visiting Taipei, you would think of recent droughts as a reflection of global climate change related to carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions. But here's the thing. In both cultures, people believe that their own understanding is correct. Whatever that understanding is, reflects the ethnoecology of that culture. So it's how people are conceptualizing nature. Consider these three examples of when students successfully applied the ethnoecology perspective in their analysis. At the top, the first example says the Nagas people spiritually see themselves as guardians of the river. Yes, they conceptualize themselves that way. The middle example says ethnoecology analysis would help direct a solution that aligns with the beliefs and values of the people living in the region. Yes, it would. Good job. The third example says their entire supply of food and water usually comes from the river, and their exports are grown from it too, making the immediate natural environment the very most important thing to them. This is an emic or insider perspective. It's the belief that the river touches every part of their life. Next, let's consider spiritual ecology, which is a shade different. Spiritual ecology refers to the spiritual value assigned to nature, its conservation, and stewardship, humans stewarding natural resources. So when we're thinking about spiritual ecology, we're curious about a society's morality with regard to nature, non-human life, how people should treat the environment. And examples we've seen in our class so far are these concepts of Mother Earth and Pachamama. These are entities with their own dignity and sometimes even legal rights. These are spiritual concepts in the hearts and minds of people worthy of protection and honor. Also consider the Endangered Species Act here in the US, which reflects our American ethos related to preventing extinctions. So I hope you can connect the dots here between this morality and spiritual value assigned to concepts of human construction that are related to nature and the world. Consider these student examples that successfully identified the spiritual ecology of people living around the Citarum River. The first says the Naga clan believes that to be happy and live a happy life, you have to be in touch and in harmony with nature. Bingo. The example below that says Patanhala is a traditional practice where the plants are serenaded with music to encourage them to grow. A cultural practitioner performs this ritual. So the cultural practitioner is someone who has devoted part of their life to doing this service to the plants. They would not do that if they did not spiritually value the plants and care for the plants and see themselves as a nurturer and steward of those plants. And the final example says, the fresh river water allowing for rich farming opportunities led to the people developing a sense of spiritual reverence for the plants and landscape. This sense of reverence and respect could be appealed to in order to compel citizens to make sacrifices to depollute the Citarum. Bingo! I love how this example leverages, again, this understanding of spiritual ecology in the region to inform anti-pollution initiatives that are likely to succeed. So knowing that people feel this reverence and respect could be appealed to in order to compel them to make personal sacrifices in order to protect the river. Good job. I hope this exercise helped clarify the sometimes subtle differences between these theoretical perspectives. I also hope that while I was reading the examples, you found yourself recognizing that some of the examples seem to fall under multiple categories, because that's true. And I can see how this might feel frustrating, but I encourage you to instead view it as an opportunity. You could identify a scenario in your monograph or a video assignment and argue that it reflects both the ethnoecology of the society and the dominant spiritual ecology of that region. Double dipping is encouraged because, remember my phrase, these are simultaneous truths. Happy hunting for these perspectives in your future analyses. I look forward to reading them.